and welcome to Dip In and Out with Lucy, the podcast that opens up the discussion around domestic abuse. I'm very lucky to be here this morning with Sarie Taylor. Sarie is a trained psychotherapist and coach. It's probably, as I always say, better to hand over to the professional to explain a little bit more about why they do what they do. And so over to you, Sarie.
Thank you very much. So I am a trained psychotherapist. I've trained in a number of different disciplines because when I was in my early 20s, I ended up with such severe debilitating anxiety that I was hospitalized, and then went on this kind of whole host of trying to fix myself for many, many years. Literally tried everything. Like, some of the stuff's comical actually that I tried, but just try and kind of stop from burning out every 12, 18 months. And then I came across something actually called the 3 principles, which is really all about understanding human nature, how humans work. And that was completely life-changing for me. So I went from being severely anxious, hospitalized, heavily medicated, to then coming across this conversation eventually and not having any of that now for over 10 years. So life's very, very different for me, thankfully. And so I get to now work with people all over the world sharing the same stuff.
That's amazing. That is amazing. And the thing is, I was saying before we started recording about anxiety and how one of the big problems, I think, around domestic abuse is people don't understand the complexities of it. So obviously there's many, many different issues to deal with, but one in particular very much is around anxiety, is around mental health, and especially in the post-separation abuse, where you kind of come into terms with things, not necessarily recovering, because I will always say it's a process of moving forward each day. It stays with you, because you can't remove that part of your life where you have experienced abuse. But what you can do is try and process it, learn to find ways of living every day to the best you can. But I think anxiety and mental health are a very big part of it. And I think it's important, again, to know where to look for support, isn't it? Because again, when you approach those kind of organizations or support services, it's the most terrifying thing to do, regardless of, obviously in this case it'd be domestic abuse, but for you doing it as well and going and looking for that support, it's admitting, isn't it, that there's something very wrong and you want to get help.
Yeah, and it's you see, it's funny because when it's admitting that we need support and we need help, and I really struggled with that in the beginning myself. I actually trained as a psychotherapist because at the time I was so embarrassed about how much I was struggling. And I realized that if you train as a therapist in the UK, you have to also be in personal therapy. So for me, my ego, that was the way in to go, oh, I'm training as a therapist, when in actual fact was like, I just need to find a way to not live like this for the rest of my life. And it just felt easier for me to say that. Whereas now, because I know that I am just as good as the next person, even though I've experienced that and I've seen my own resilience now, it's just fine for me to talk about, what I did and how I had to get support and things like that. But when we're in it, especially when we're in it, it can feel really difficult because we're usually already quite down on ourselves, quite self-critical. I've never met somebody suffering with anxiety that isn't talking to themselves with quite a lot of judgment. And so when we're in that, it makes sense that we would see reaching out for help as another thing to beat ourselves up with or to judge ourselves for and see ourselves as a failure, when actually it's absolutely not. To me, it shows a great deal of strength actually to reach out and ask for help. And I think, just as you said then, that post-separation, that's the time where people put so much pressure on themselves to be okay, because it's like, oh, we're out of it now. We're settling, we should be okay now. But often the body, once you start to settle, that's where your adrenaline levels and your hypervigilance will start to hopefully gradually come down. And that's often the time where we really notice that instability in how we feel more than ever. So it can sometimes for people feel like, I feel worse now than I did. But that's because you've not got the same level of adrenaline, thankfully, surging through your body all the time. And you will notice that difference. And that, again, is part of the process that's expected. It's normal, it's part of human nature. But then people sort of think, well, why now? Why do I feel worse now? Why do I feel more anxious now? And that's because they don't understand really how anxiety works. And there's a huge misunderstanding on how it works.
That is so, I'm going to say how important that is to make that point, because very often when the post-separation abuse starts to play out, the victim, survivor, whatever anyone wants to call themselves, is they're spinning so many plates. So they're probably dealing with children's services, family court, could be dealing with the police. They're dealing with, if they work, they're dealing with having to try and hold down a job, prove to the world that they're okay. And yeah, you're right. You know, the stigma is that once you're out of that situation, I will always say, if you're fortunate enough to be able to leave, many people can't, many people stay in the relationships. And I have worked with people who've chosen to stay, but just want to know how to keep themselves safe in that situation. Because again, it can be financial, it can be so many other reasons why you can't leave. But if you do, and your body starts to adjust to the fact that you're not living on eggshells all the time, you know, you're not constantly in the pit of your stomach feeling that, oh my God, what's going to happen now? Have I said the wrong thing? Have I done the wrong thing? It's going to cause another argument. And I think knowing that and recognizing that it's okay to feel like that, because that is your normal kind of response, isn't it? It's like the trauma that you've experienced. I've worked with people who a cupboard door can slam and they'll jump out of their skin.
So you'll go into fight or flight, and it's a habit that we create because we're sending a message to our brain. When we're experiencing abuse, we're sending a message to our brain that we're in constant danger. And so you will go from 0 to 100 so quickly. Whereas somebody who's not experiencing abuse, it might take a number of things before they then feel on edge. And so, but one thing that I feel really passionate about is that I was once told that because I've overproduced adrenaline for years as a child and been overstimulated for years, that I would just have to learn to manage that anxiety, and that it was going to be. So I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, acute panic disorder, and depression. And I was told I just had to learn to live with it. That is absolutely not true. With understanding and awareness, I am proof, and so many other people that have come across what I've come across, that just because that's the habit that we've created, that hypervigilance, fight or flight, doesn't mean our bodies can't settle. And one example I always use to people is, it's like riding a bike and you're pedaling this bike at 1,000,000 miles an hour, trying to do everything, trying to survive. You take your feet off those pedals, the bike doesn't just stop.
Yeah.
It has to come to a slow. And that's where it's about getting comfortable with the discomfort of you readjusting to that. Because, you know, if you take your feet off pedals on a bike and it's going fast, it feels really unsteady and unnerving. Like you just want to put your feet back on the pedal. But in actual fact, the bike will eventually slow. It just takes time. And so often people create this vicious cycle because they're like, oh, I feel physically don't feel good. I don't feel right. I feel anxious. And they put the feet back on the pedals and try and see themselves as broken and fix themselves. And it can become a bit never ending. But actually, when we get a bit more comfortable with that discomfort of that anxiety, of your body readjusting, of your body settling, and your lizard brain, which is the part that deals with fight or flight, realizing you're not in constant imminent danger, it just takes a little bit of time. And that's where, again, the support is important, being able to speak to people who understand, of just riding out that discomfort, if you like. Because again, I don't want to sound dismissive with this, and I have experienced trauma myself, in that, I'm not minimizing it, but when we're out of that situation, we are re-experiencing it through our thoughts, through our reality. And it can be that your senses are overstimulated. So a smell can create somebody to think, oh God, that reminds me of this. Or so for me, my dad was an alcoholic, and for me, the smell of a leather jacket reminds me of alcohol, and because my dad would always wear this leather jacket. So I appreciate that we can have that smell, and subconsciously we barely can even notice the thoughts that we're having. But when we then start to feel that discomfort, listening to your body and kind of that's sending you a message that your thinking has gone off in a really unhelpful direction, can then sort of bring you back into the present moment of like, okay, I'm okay right now. I'm okay.
Yeah.
And it's that, and that can take some, not even practice, it's just a level of understanding that often we don't always have. And then it's about learning and understanding that, so say, for example, if my thoughts do go in a direction like that, and I feel it, the discomfort, it doesn't last as long, and it will settle quite easily, because I don't fear it as an experience anymore, because I understand what's happening. And that's really important.
I was just going to say, I love that comfort in the discomfort, because so often with people who've experienced abuse is they don't want to feel discomfort anymore, but you have to get to that point where you can say, you know, I need to actually, I don't know how you word it, but sit with it and accept that, you know, a cupboard door slamming is not that person in the house with you. doing that. Yes, it might take you back to that moment that happened or whatever it was, but you're not there. And one of the big things I will always say about abusive relationships is it's not real life. It's not reality. It seems like reality when you're in it, and it's very much your reality.
Yeah.
But when you come out of that situation, what you realize is that wasn't a normal relationship. It wasn't healthy. It wasn't normal, but it was for you when you were in that. So there's so much to unpack. There's so much to process. But I do like that idea of, because you can't hide away from it. You can't, and everybody's different. And some people will go for support. They'll find that it's too soon, access support too soon. They're not ready for it, and they'll go away, and they may end up being re-referred back in months later. It can take years sometimes. So you've got to be ready to accept that this isn't the time for you. You've got to just take your time. And it can be lots of different, what I love about what you do as well is there can be many different ways of accessing support. So if you think, it's not just that you have to go for one type of counselling, or if you want to go and see a life coach rather than a counsellor, there's all these options. And that's one thing abusive relationships have never offered you, is choices. You were always told what to do.
Yeah, and it's like, and people, and still now, and it can be one of the quite controversial things about me and my work that people don't always like, is that I am very open and honest about my own experience. So even as a trained psychotherapist now, I do not tend to use traditional psychology or therapy on people, because for me, certainly with anxiety and hypervigilance, it didn't work for me. And so I can only share what really helped me, which was this understanding. And the one thing I love about this understanding is it's so accessible, because if you don't want to, if someone wants to come and talk to me about their past trauma, I will listen. I will be there and I will just listen. If you do not want to talk about it, if it's painful, if it's scary, if it's triggering, I can share, or anyone, there are options where you can learn about how your mind and body connect, how to get comfortable with the discomfort without going over any of that. And that's what I love about it. And that's why it's so great with children as well, because they often don't want to sit in front of a stranger and tell them all the problems. Sometimes they do, but they don't have to. And again, I think people can find that they don't access support because they assume, because of the way we talk about traditional psychology, that they're going to have to sit and pour their heart out, and they don't.
Yeah,
they absolutely don't. You can protect yourself, what feels comfortable, and you can get support that meets you exactly where you're at. And if that's so, some people, I would literally start off teaching them like it's a biology lesson.
Yeah,
you can intellectually often just manage that, without having to go into that feelings space, or
disconnecting in it in a way. So you're thinking, yeah, I like that. Yeah,
and that's again the thing that worked for me, in a way that nothing ever had before. I didn't have to go dredging through all my past. I didn't have to. And people might say that's avoidance. Well, all I know is I'm really content and happy in my life right now. If I think long and hard enough about stuff that's happened in the past, I will feel those thoughts. I will feel sadness. I will feel fear. But I don't need to do that in order to be content and at peace in my life. And it sounds really simple, but we massively overcomplicate it most of the time, because, again, understandably, the dialogue is you need to do this, you need to process this, you need to, but there's so much simplicity in what we can understand to feel much calmer and much more at peace day to day now in our lives.
Yeah. And, with that as well, I was just thinking, if, as I say, a parent of a child who has lived in an abusive environment, or it continues again through the post-separation abuse, is if as a parent you are in a position where you can do all of that and be able to be comfortable with it, to be able to be at peace, you're much more likely to be able to support your own child, because your head's in that space where you can say, actually, okay, now I can detach that, and I can say, what do I need to do to get my child the help and support that they need? Because one of the things I was talking about in another episode recently was a really difficult concept for a lot of people to accept, is a child who has experienced abuse or has been in an abusive home still loves both parents. Regardless if one is the victim and one is the perpetrator, a child will love both. And you can't force that, for them to see that, well, that's wrong, this is wrong, you shouldn't love that person. Well, actually, what will happen to that child in the future if they don't have that love? They can love the parent. They don't have to respect the behavior. They don't have to like the behavior that's shown to them. But I think it's important for for parents as well to realize, and especially parents who've experienced abuse, is be able to say, right, well, I have to accept that these are the certain fundamentals of what's going to happen. They will still love that parent, they will still want X, Y, and Z, but how can I help them when they are being manipulated, when they are being coerced into believing that, you know, the perpetrator is this perfect individual? It's hard because kids are very black and white sometimes, aren't they?
Yeah, they are, but it's nature.
Yeah.
It's nature, and it's not, and actually, this might again be hard to hear, but it wouldn't be me if I wasn't controversial and said, you know, how I feel.
Love it.
There can be benefits to them still seeing beyond the behavior and having love, because what that enables as they grow up is an ability for them to find compassion and forgiveness. And compassion and forgiveness, as hard as it is what will set them free from a lot of their suffering. And forgiveness isn't for the other person, it's for yourself.
Yeah.
And, you know, how we can then start or begin to let go of some of the suffering and the resistance that creates stress and tension for us unnecessarily. And that's a really difficult subject, because forgiveness, you know, and if you consider some of the circumstances that people are in, but ultimately forgiveness is for us. It is not about the other person, and we don't have to like what someone's done. It's about seeing the core of a human being is that, you know, again, it sounds very complacent to say it, but hurt people hurt people. There is truth in that, and it's that, you know, somebody has lost their way and made awful decisions and abused other people. Like, not on any level would I ever say that was okay. But sometimes kids can see beyond and see at the core that love and that compassion, and see that human being, because that's what they want to see. Again, it is nature. I think the other thing, whilst we're talking about this, that's really important, and I hear this a lot, is that, and I hear this with people who are not necessarily even in abusive relationships, but in relationships that are just not working for them anymore.
Yeah.
This, I can't leave, I don't want to ruin things for my children. The fact of the matter is, we are all going to face challenges. We are all going to find ourselves in positions and situations we never expected and didn't want. That is part of life. And it's not about blaming yourself or feeling guilty for that, because our kids are way more resilient than we give them credit for, as are we. And it's much better. I can remember, my mum wouldn't mind me saying this, I can remember when her and my dad were in what you would describe an abusive, unhealthy relationship. And we used to beg her to leave him. Please leave him. And yet I know part of her dialogue was, we'll stay together whilst you're all at school. And it's just so like backwards in a way. Of like, and I'm not saying it's easy for the kids, and I'm not saying the separation is easy, but what's great is for children to see, okay, mum was unhappy or dad was unhappy. And yes, it was challenging. Yes, it was difficult. Yes, this separation was not, you know, it was sad. It created anger. It created fear. But they're also seeing we can come out the other side. The message to me for your kids in those situations is loud and clear. If you are in a situation where you are desperately unhappy, it's okay for you to put yourself first too. And I think that we forget often what they're seeing. They're seeing resilience. They can see mum or dad cry every single day, but they'll also see mum functioning, mum making dinner, mum or dad making dinner. They will see the resilience in human beings. We don't have to hide the fact that we have ups and downs, challenges, emotions, feelings, because you know what? They know anyway. They're so perceptive. Like, they know when we're not happy. Sometimes it makes me laugh at my teenager. She freaks me out, because sometimes I'll be in a low mood and I'm like, all pretending to be happy, and she'll message me, "What's up, mum?" You know?
She just knows.
Who is this strange being who seems to read my mind? Because they are very intuitive with their parents, but it's not this idea of damaging. Human beings do not become damaged and broken beyond repair. Our mind and our bodies reset. All we need is safety, security, and love in order to reset, and not as much of it as we even think. So this idea of us damaging our children and then feeling awful for what we've put them through, or we stayed, therefore we've done this. No, focus on what you do have to offer to your children. Focus on the resilience that you're showing them, even if you're staying there, you know, and you do want to move, and yet you're thinking, right now I'm not, and this isn't, like, just focus on the love that you can give regardless of your external circumstances, because, you know, as parents, we're actually pretty phenomenal even in those challenging times, and it really saddens me at times for people with the way they talk about the damage they've done to their children. It's like, you know, look at what you have done.
Yeah.
Instead of what.
Yeah. And that, again, that's a really good point, because so many parents who leave an abusive relationship put so much pressure on themselves. But what I will often say is, when people say, oh, so you know, your children are from a broken home, or whatever anyone wants to call it, and you can't, no, actually the home that you were in was the home that was broken. It wasn't healthy. It wasn't, you know, good for your children to be able to see what was going on. And actually to come out of that is the brave option. And it's not easy, but at the same time, what you're giving them is your children that safety, that security, that love, and you're doing the best to show them that that's what can be happening, that can be life, and that can be the future for you. And I think another thing that is a big part of abuse and dealing with situations, and again, it crops up quite a lot, is friendships and kind of your support networks. And I was at a conference on Friday. I went to see the film Love by Sam Beckinsale, and one of the things I was talking to with somebody afterwards was just around, how do we, you know, when it comes to, say, a friend noticing a situation. So this individual was talking about, well, I could see it, but I didn't know whether I should say something. And I think that's always difficult. So when that happens, and when it comes to, say, somebody from the outside looking in, and very often, again, something I will say is, it's very difficult for somebody to look into that situation and know how best to handle it, because all you want to do as a friend is protect that person. You know, you've probably known them a lot longer than the perpetrator has. You know them inside out. You could have gone to school together. You know, you could have known them for many, many years, and they know you. But it's how, you know, how do you approach it? And I don't think there's anything wrong with somebody saying something. I think it's how the victim chooses to respond is the difficulty, because it's how, what language do we use? How do we, you know, because very much and very often that victim at that point in time, as I've learned through the work I've done, is they are trauma bonded to that person. That perpetrator has made that life so that the victim and the perpetrator, there's nobody else. You know, this is why when we talk about coercive control, the isolation from family and friends, the making sure that financially you're not secure, all the things to do to take away any security and safety around you. And then ultimately it will come down to isolating your friends and anybody they perceive as a threat. And I always think that's one of the hardest things, because I don't think there's an easy answer to how do friendship, you know, how do people go and have that conversation, because it's a very difficult one, isn't it?
It's very, yeah, and it's very sensitive. And again, we're only human. So I've been in this situation a couple of times personally as a friend with people who are in abusive, unhealthy relationships, and partly because of the nature of my job, and even before my job, I was always somebody that would talk to people about problems and stuff. So people would often come to me to want to talk, but then the difficulty is, so my experience has been that, as you've said, realizing, I suppose, a naivety and a lack of experience at the time when I was in this situation is, I suppose, my ego getting in the way, feeling my own, I suppose, projecting my own understanding outwards is that, and I'll be honest, at the time, it's like, why can't you see what they're doing?
Yeah.
You need to leave. You need to, and feeling so angry and frustrated of what is seen, but then expecting the other person to be where I'm at when they're not where I'm at.
That's a
They're
good
in
point.
the situation.
Yeah.
And so looking back, you know, what all we can do is be there, listen, and be ready to support when asked to support. And that's what's so difficult, because it's holding your nerve when you see what is going on. And then for me, then seeing friendships break down inevitably, because I've just threatened your whole being by outing this situation that might feel scary, that might feel impossible for you to do anything about. And so then I become a threat. And that then cuts off that relationship. And then you're not there to help and support people. So for me, it's about separating your own ego in a way of wanting to be right and wanting to be the savior and be the person that helps because you know what's right and you know what's wrong, and taking a step back from that and realizing you don't know everything. You don't know, you outing this behavior, for example, doesn't then suddenly make it easy for the person to go, oh, okay, yeah, I'll leave. It's like, so you've got to, for me, it's just about being open and being understanding. And you can end up in psychological games. And I don't know whether you've probably heard about this. It's sort of like done quite a lot in corporate training. But looking at the drama triangle, it's a TA psychotherapy theory of victim, rescuer, and perpetrator. And what you do when you're then having those conversations, you become a part of that psychological game. So you're wanting to perpetrate the perpetrator, and then they can potentially become the victim because you're currently the victim, but you're now rescuing them, going, they're not that bad. They do this for me, or they do that for me. And then I end up feeling like the victim because I'm like, I only tried to help and look where it got me. And we all end up in this same psychological game. And it's actually, as hard as it is to take a step back and listen and just be there, that is more empowering for the other person, for them on their own terms to decide when is right for them, when feels safe for them. But as somebody who's been in that situation, and if someone was listening to this now and they have a friend in that situation, I understand how frustrating and how it can feel like what you want to do is rescue and take this person out of the situation, and you'd do anything for your friends that you're close with. And for me, I'd be like, come and move in with me, come and stay with me, but that's just not how it works. And so if I was in that situation ever again, what I would do much differently this time is just, I'd probably make it known that, not saying things that I think are factual or not, but just saying, I just get the sense that things are difficult, and you just want you to know that I'm here if you ever need somebody to listen to. And that's where I would leave it. And I would just make myself available, make sure I'm contactable, and wait for them to be ready.
That I was going to say, it's like you've already done the courses. Domestic abuse awareness, because that's precisely what we would say is, it's listening. It's really hard because it feels like your hands are tied behind your back, but it is giving them that time, because like you said before, you can see it and you might be ready to see it, but they aren't. And there's so many other psychological things that are going on that person is in such a fog, because we'll always say, like, it's like coming out of a fog when you are then going for support and going for help, and you kind of go, oh my God, so there's like 10 people in this room, and I can relate to her. Oh, but I can also relate to her. And there's so many, it's those light bulb moments that eventually are the things that will make the difference. But when it comes to friends and family, and this is again one of the things I tried to do with the podcast, with the website, is it's not just for victims and survivors, it is for family and friends as well. They can go and read things and go, okay, or watch this or listen and say, so what I need to do in that situation is be patient, is let them know I'm there to listen. Because very much as well, I think with victims and survivors is they don't know who to trust. They've lost all sense of themselves. They don't know who they can trust anymore. And they certainly don't trust their own judgment. And until they can get to a point where they can start to trust their own judgment, know that their self-worth isn't rock bottom, that they are, a very, very big one that you hear a lot is, I'm not stupid, that's a real kind of classic that you get with victims survivors. I'm not stupid. And it's because they're trying to tell themselves they're not, because they've been told for so long, it's been either said to them or it's been actioned, put into, may not be always said. Sometimes it's the way they're treated, that they know that that's what that person thinks, that perpetrator believes about them. And I think, definitely that's the most important thing for me is with friendships, is that listening, definitely.
And there's so I've done whole lessons and training courses on listening alone, because we think we're good listeners and often we're not. Because what we do is we listen, and we're even taught. So I was taught in probation in the criminal justice service, which I worked for many years. I was taught how to actively listen, nod, repeat back, say the right things. That's all well and good to show you're listening, but are you really deep listening? Probably not. And I think that for me has been, again, something that's helped me in my job get better results, better outcomes, Because if we're listening, but in our head, so the way you'll know you're listening or not is if in your head you're already thinking of the next thing you're going to say, if you're already got the solution you want to give to them, to their problem, you are not listening to a word they're saying. You're listening with what you think you're hearing. You're not actually deep listening. And so it's again about getting better at actually listening. You know, what people often forget is that people don't wake up one day and go, oh, I'm going to plonk myself in this shit situation where I am, you know, being abused. And I'm like, this is stuff that happens cumulatively, small things over a period of time that build up to the bigger things. So as much as it feels very clear to us of like, well, I know the solution to your problem, we might think we do, but this person has along the way gotten very confused, very judgmental of themselves, very low self-esteem, you know, feeling trapped, feeling all of these things that they just need to be listened to. But for us to listen with an open mind, not what we think we know the truth is, because we don't.
That is a very good point, because again, like you say, we can have all the tools to think that we are listening, but unless we're actually trying to sit in that moment with them and not be worrying about what can I say next to make it better, because whatever you may have planned to say next might be the wrong thing to say anyway, because you're not actually listening to what they've
listening.
just said.
Absolutely not listening. And this is for any parents out there. You want to enhance your relationship with your child, learn to get better at listening. I still am rubbish at listening to my teenager at times, because I'm like, I know what she needs. You need to tidy your room, you need to do this, you need to do that. I'm not listening. But because she has quite a good understanding of this stuff as well, and goes on some of my training stuff, she will actually say to me, you're not listening to me, Mum.
Yeah.
I'm grateful for that, because I'm like, you're right. I'm absolutely not. And you know what? We all do it. We're taught to do it. Like, as I say, even in training the criminal justice stuff, I was taught to actively listen. And if I'm in my head thinking, make sure you're showing them that you're listening, I'm not listening.
Knees together, feet on the floor, eye
Yes.
contact.
Yes, make some acknowledgements, you know, motivationally listen, make them aware, this motivational interviewing. Like, actually just drop all of that, just be in the moment and just fall into deep listening wherever possible.
Yeah, because again, you know, what that person might be, when you were saying that, just where in that moment, that might be the first time that person has been honest and open about this. And it's scary. And again, one thing you find a lot with, especially victims and survivors who have children, is they're petrified of the system. They're petrified of every system that might get involved if they, you know, announce to the world that they are in an abusive situation. So trusting somebody and talking about it, it might be the first time they've ever even considered, oh my God, you know, there's a million things going around the head and what's going to happen next and what's going to happen next. But they're trying to bring that all out and it's a very brave thing to do. And I think, you know, a lot of people will say, oh, but I stayed in it for so long, or I did this, I'm an idiot, I'm that. But you did eventually find the strength, or however you did it, because it's different for everybody. And you did it. And you got to that point where, what I will always say is, everybody has the right to a life and live a life they deserve. Nobody should have to live a life where they feel trapped, where they feel unloved, uncared for. And, you know, just like you say, get through it until the kids are older and then it'll all be okay. Don't upset the apple cart. There's GCSEs coming, there's 11 pluses coming, there's all
unit.
Exactly. And it goes on and on and on. And that's the kind of thing that perpetrators will rely on, that you won't go, because you are that parent. And very often a victim and survivor is somebody who's a real empath. And that's why they forgive as often as they do the perpetrator's behavior, is because they want to see the good. They don't want to believe for 1 second that the person that they've married isn't, or live with, isn't the person that they thought they were. And it's because they played a good game from the very beginning, and they have been very cunning, and they've love bombed, and they've done all they need to do. And something else you said before that was really important was around, you know, it does go on for a long time. If people think that they've watched, say, I don't know, Sleeping with the Enemy or some films, and they're like, oh, in 2 hours, look what happens, then she's out and it's all done. Domestic abuse is something that is insidious. It's a drip, drip, drip effect, and it will go on for a very long time. It's one of the most frightening experiences, because half the time you don't even see it coming. You know, it's gone on for so long, and that is your norm. And I did an episode with he's called Tony Blockley, and he's head of criminology at Leeds Uni, and he did one about risk factors. How do you, he was an ex-police officer, how do you then assess risk of somebody if to them this is normal?
Yeah, their boundaries and their levels of risk has completely, their tolerance to risk and boundaries has completely changed. Exactly that. And do you know the thing I think that people don't often realize, again, with us trying to problem solve for other people, take them out of it. Change doesn't come from information. Change doesn't come from us knowing what services they're available. Change comes from personal insight. Something switches in somebody's head, and it might seem very subtle, where they have a personal insight and perspective where they go, this is not happening anymore, or I can do this, or I know what I need to do next. That's wisdom. We all have access to our own gut and our own wisdom.
Yeah.
Whether we listen to it or not is another thing. And that's about, again, getting quiet and listening. So if you're just listening to somebody, what you're enabling is them to fall into their own wisdom, to have their own change in perspective that then triggers an insight, which is life-changing. People think that we have to kind of bombard people with solutions and to change. Change comes from within. We decide when the time is right for us, when we feel we are able, because we've listened to our wisdom and we follow through on that. And that comes from insight. And anybody can support anybody else having insights in their lives just by getting quiet alongside them.
Yeah. And there's so much chaos and noise around abuse in terms of what's going on in your head. If, like I said, if you've got children you're considering, it could be, you know, you're worried about what your parents will think or say, or your siblings, your friends, everybody. There's a lot, very noisy, and there's a lot going on. And I think if you are, you know, we all, thank God, most of us have friendships where we know that there is somebody that could be that person to say, I can be there, and I am going to listen, and I am just going to take in everything you say. And another thing I would always say is, truth is stranger than fiction. And I remember when I was group facilitating at the charity I work for, and I remember people will go, and you're not going to believe this, I go, try me. Because there's nothing I wouldn't believe. There is no scenario that you could tell me around domestic abuse that I'm going to go, that never happened. I absolutely believe it, 100%.
And who are we to tell anybody that never happened? Because the other thing is, there is an element of versions of things. So, for example, people will say children elaborate, and they might elaborate. They might add things on. They might make something up. But why are they doing that?
Yeah.
Because they're hurting. Something's going on. So all of our versions of truth look slightly different. You and I could be in a situation in a room and something happens. We both come away and tell our truth of that. It might differ.
Yeah.
It might, but it still happened. And it's that, again, it's like, we don't need to fully understand, again, somebody else's truth in order to listen.
Yeah. Oh my, I love that. I need to put that. That's going to be the quote that I put with this episode, because I love that. We don't have to, and we can't understand somebody else's truth because it is unique to them.
Yes. And all this about empathizing, put yourself in their shoes. Well, you know what? It's very bloody difficult to do that because we're not in their shoes. We can listen with an open mind and hear something. We can be there, but we don't have to be in their shoes in order to support and listen and just be alongside. That is all we can ever do. That's all we need to do.
Yeah. And it would make a huge difference. And again, the lovely thing about that is having friends and family is, once you have access support, and again, the reason I do what I do is because it does come to an end. There is sadly not enough funding. There's all the issues there. So I want things to be available so you can feel like you're sitting. And a few people said, I feel like when I listen or watch them, it's just like sitting with a couple of mates and you're having a conversation. That's why I do it in the way I do, because it should feel, it's a very, very scary subject to talk about from the outside, but if you're sitting in it and going, oh my God, is that all right? Okay, so that they're talking about abuse. Yeah, it is okay to talk about it. It's okay to talk about it in a normal way, because it is going on every day in so many lives. And you know, friends and family are the ones who will be there for you long after support services are no longer involved. And they are the ones who know you better than anybody. And actually, very often you find that friends and family are in awe of that person for where they've come, you know, where they've gone to from where they were. And it's lovely because they can be like you, almost like your cheerleaders in a way, going, you've got this, you know, you're doing it, and they know you better than anybody else.
And you know, the other thing is, actually, there is no better cheerleader and no one understands you better than yourself.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of my job, is to help people see their own resilience, see that the change will come from their own insights. And again, that will be there long after anybody. You're going to be with yourself till the day you die. And the more we see that we're worthy, that we are deserving of love and compassion, that we are, you know, we lose sight of it. Of course we do, we all do. But realizing that it's not gone anywhere, we still have access to that wisdom. We still have access to that love and that compassion that we can give ourselves at any time. We just allow ourselves and have permission to do that. And that's the bit where, for me, that's what creates the lasting change, is that people seeing for themselves that they are their own home. They are everything that they need, but they just innocently lose sight of it. And it's about pointing people back in that direction of, you have everything you need. You have all the answers that you need within yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've summed it up perfectly. I'm not going to lie. You have.
I really enjoyed that. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. And yes, so I will make sure it goes out, obviously, the usual places. It's Spotify, YouTube, and the website. And I'll put all links on. So, and obviously Sarie's services will be on there as well, if anybody wants to access that. Because again, you know, friends, family may want to, very often they're the ones that need support as well while they're going through all this. And yeah, perfect. Thank you so much, Sarie. Thank you.
Thanks.
Where